Вы слышите этот звук, друзья?
Can you hear this sound, guys? It alone makes my blood freeze in my veins, I'm telling you.
Честно говоря.
There is an underground river right above me, and then above it, there is the entire city of Paris, with all of its towers, but none of that seems to exist when you're here.
Дальше надо шлепать.
From now on, I have to walk in water. Crap, and it's most likely teeming with bugs and all sorts of slimy things like caves usually do.
Какие-нибудь в пещерах же любят много.
Tons of gold, exquisite wines, and millions of dead bodies. This is all concealed deep underground from the tourists visiting Paris. Oh my god. Finally.
Счастье.
I can finally stretch my legs and stand upright. And yet, there are people who practically live here. Today, I'll show you all the skeletons that Paris is hiding deep in its depths. This is Lyadov, and today we are in Paris. Say Paris and people think of the Eiffel Tower, but today I'm going to show you an absolutely different side of Paris. We will go underground to discover the lesser-known world under the city of Paris that stretch for at least 175 miles, making up an elaborate labyrinth.
Are you subscribed to our channel? Not yet? The sad thing is that Anton can't go on his next adventure until you do. So pretty please, subscribe now. That's right. Go ahead, click subscribe. Well done and thank you. We can continue now.
That's right, my friends, we are now going to see the city's most exciting part, the Catacombs of Paris. They stretch for miles and miles under the city and are centuries old. Some parts of them were used as a prison, for example. People still keep finding human remains and bones there. It looks just like an ordinary street where you have to take a turn and find this little spot. There are many ways to enter the Catacombs of Paris in different parts of the city. I chose the most inconspicuous one, which at the same time seems to be quite atmospheric. Just look at this place. Isn't it gorgeous? It looks like it's been made to go on film, like in my report or whatever. I mean, seriously, an abandoned metro station. These old train tracks that have been out of use for a long time, this wire fence that blocks the entrance to the tunnel. The walls here are covered with graffiti to such an extent that it makes me feel like I'm suddenly inside Grand Theft Auto. The locals here are also nothing like the French you see in the city, enjoying their wine on a terrace. If you take a closer look, there's a life of its own happening here. Here's a couple in fatigues with huge backpacks. They look like they're characters in Stalker. A couple of guys are playing a French game of pétanque, and their very look says to me something like, "What are you doing here, dude?" Two more guys inside the tunnel are busy sorting something on a barrier. It's a real labyrinth, and if you don't have a plan, a map? If you have no map, your chance of survival here is around 1%. Seriously, it's that bad. Well, it's a labyrinth. This is Sebastian. He's probably the most unusual French guy I've ever met. His mother is French and his father is Russian. They met when she came to Moscow to study Russian, and she stayed. Sebastian was born in Russia, but his parents eventually split up. His mum returned to France and took him with her. Many of these tunnels hit a dead end. And if you don't know where the exits are, there's no way you can find them. And that's a fact. To reassure me a little, Sebastian went on to say that people who got lost here get found too. It's true, there have been cases when people got lost. They lost their guides and stayed behind in the catacombs. In such cases, people call police, and the police search the tunnels.
И надо было звать полицию, и полиция их искала.
In order to find someone, they send several teams, each searching an assigned area,
Бригад, который каждый участок смотрит.
and it takes them a day or two to find a lost person.
Целый день-два, наверное.
There are some safety rules for exploring the tunnels, and the key ones are these.
Избегаем полиции.
Avoid the police, since you're going to a place that's illegal to go to, even though there are hundreds or perhaps even thousands of visitors in the catacombs. Really?
Да. И...
Yes, and another rule is always tell someone that you're going underground before you go, in case something happens.
В случае, если что-то произойдет.
Note how many bags I'm carrying, a camera, 2 light stands, a tripod. In short, back then, I had no idea what I'm getting into.
Итак,
There are exactly 600 railroad ties to the entrance. Sebastian did the counting himself. Actually, it's the best thing you can do for yourself when you're down here. Try to note every little thing around you, because the labyrinth is very unpredictable, to say the least.
скажем так, малопредсказуемый.
In fact, we haven't even reached the catacombs yet. This abandoned railway was built in the 19th century, when the city of Paris had a huge defensive wall built around it. Only abandoned spots like this serve as a reminder of those times. But back then, Paris was a fortified camp surrounded by a wall, moats, and forts.
Это называется Petit Ceinture.
This is called Petit Ceinture, or Little Belt in English.
ЖД дороги, которая была
It was a railroad that was built for defense purposes in the late 19th century.
19 века для,
Like
кстати,
many big cities, Paris had a defensive wall.
Просто раньше, как, все города, Париж
It was located about 200 yards from here,
которое было приблизительно метров 200 отсюда.
and they built this railroad to transport supplies, soldiers, and everything that's necessary.
Солдат, амуницию, продовольствие.
They simply built a railway all the way along the wall on the inside.
Или вот такую ЖД дорогу, которая вот весь круг
With
делала.
time, it failed to be successful as a commercial project and was eventually abandoned. These tunnels are scary enough, in fact. I felt my heart sink when we saw 2 silhouettes at the entrance. I thought, what if it's the police? Then there's nowhere to run and hide. Meanwhile, these people started moving very quickly towards us. When you look at Paris, you can't help but wonder where these catacombs may even be. That there are up to 250 miles of tunnels under the city. We are now on our way to this elaborate network of underground passages, some forgotten. The real problem is that there is no complete map of this extensive underground network. People keep trying to draw it, but all these attempts represent only bits and pieces of the actual thing. Our goal today is to make our way to the spookiest place inside the catacombs. I was told we'd have to literally walk on the bones and skulls of dead people there.
Туннель, который там проходит.
There was a tunnel nearby, and cataphiles decided to dig a passage to reach it. And cataphiles are the people who love cats? No. That's what we call people who like to explore the catacombs. You might indeed think it's about cats, but it's about the catacombs, really. Cataphiles.
Но не, катакомбы, катафил.
Do you recall the 2 shadows I thought might be policemen? They turned out to be simply 2 dudes who decided to ask us if we might have some pliers they wanted to borrow to remove the security tag from a new pair of shoes, saying they forgot to ask for it at a store.
Так, короче,
And
так.
finally, we reached the entrance to the catacombs. See this small opening in the ground? It makes one think of Tom and Jerry, doesn't it? Remember how Tom always had trouble squeezing into Jerry's hiding places? God damn, I got my butt wet.
Задницей. Ох. Вот так вот.
That's me getting in, comfy. Any hole in a wall can turn out to be an entrance to yet another tunnel. I had to crouch most of the way through these tunnels, and trust me, it's very hard. God. Ugh. They told me that all those who come here for the first time begin by trying to leap from one dry spot to another one, trying to stay dry, but no one ever comes dry out of the tunnels.
А все получается? Больше нет камней, по которым...
That's it. There are no more dry spots to try and get to. From now on, I have to walk in the water. Oh, crap.
Fuck.
Fuck, it's wet. Crap.
Блин, а там же, наверное, еще какие-то жучки.
And it's most likely teeming with bugs and all sorts of slimy things, you know, like caves usually do.
Да посмотрите на них, посмотрите и все.
Look at my feet, look at them. I'm ankle deep in water. But, take my word for it, I feel much better here because having to crouch all the time was a real hell. And the water level is rising. First it only covered my toes, and then it got ankle deep, and it's getting higher. Wow, I'm going under. It looks like it.
Щиколотки, смотрите. О, я прям ухожу под воду. Какое счастье.
Finally. Oh, I can stretch my legs and stand upright. Oh my god. Ugh. Oh my dear god, I'll be damned. It turns out it's so incredibly good just to be able to stand upright, you see. It's one of those moments where you realize how little, in fact, you need to be happy. Oh god. Having to crouch was a real nightmare. It's no wonder that forcing people into stress positions like crouching is a torture technique. It's a horrible thing.
Когда людей сажают на корточки. Это страшная вещь.
Here, underground, you start imagining all sorts of wild things, like picturing an inquisitorial court in action, especially since the Inquisition had its start in the 12th century Kingdom of France. The idea was to punish people who weren't pious or devout enough in the eyes of the church. First, the so-called heretics and witches were simply burned at the stake. But then, holy prosecutors decided it would be good to have them first confess all their sins. Torture had existed long before that, but the Inquisition triggered a real torture device race. The Germans were said to have invented the Iron Maiden, a torture device consisting of a solid iron cabinet with a hinged front. When closing, the long spikes on the interior side of the doors would pierce a person inside, making them bleed slowly for a long time. Spain invented the Spanish boot. That did indeed look a bit like a tall boot. The device squeezed the victim's calf between two curved iron plates studded with spikes, teeth, and knobs to fracture the bones. Sometimes the plates were also heated up by fire. Austria's favorite torture was by a torture rack, a device that would pull the victim apart until dislocating and separating their joints. The Austrians are said to have upgraded the method by setting the rack at 45 degrees and using a ratchet mechanism at the top to very gradually retract the chains, securing the prisoner. Compared to this, the French invention appears almost humane. While similar beheading devices had been used elsewhere in Europe over several centuries, the guillotine received its name and became best known for its use in France during the French Revolution. It was proposed by Dr. Joseph Guillotine, who wanted to minimize the suffering inflicted by capital punishment. The good doctor was, in fact, not proud at all that the machine became known, and his family even chose to change their name. The first executioner to use the guillotine was Charles-Henri Sanson. He was said to have executed once 12 people within 13 minutes, and on another occasion a total of 300 people in just 3 days. Charles-Henri Sanson was the fourth in a sixth-generation family dynasty, and they were proud of their name. The Sansons served as executioners in Paris for over 100 years. Look, there's some big chamber in here. It's huge, wow! Wow, it must be a popular spot. Look, there's lots of graffiti everywhere here. Oh, Jesus Christ, look who's here to meet all the visitors, this cute and impressive bogeyman. Wow. Some people have carved it out of stone here. Can you imagine this? There's something under its feet. Look what I found. It's like it could have been a life vest or something. And look, it's got a tube. Oh God, what a spooky thing to see.
С трубкой, господи. Кошмар.
Oh my god, I am in Paris. Why am I not eating a croissant somewhere? As soon as we entered the tunnels, I realized the huge problem. They're too small, and one has to crouch. I even thought that maybe I need to call it a day and go home. There was no way I could imagine I'd walk almost 10 miles in such conditions. Oh, I'm tired. I need a break. You know how much I've already walked already? About 3 yards, I guess. There's no electricity here, which is good because I can't get electrocuted by a wire falling into a puddle of water. But if you think of it, it's not so good either. If you run out of batteries, it might cost you your life.
Guys, if you like my video and if you like what we're doing, I would really appreciate if you support us on Patreon, on Pioneer or on PayPal, and we try to make even more great films from new dangerous places for you. Thank you. All the links are in the description. Please donate.
I knew one guy who ran out of power whilst underground, and he had no spare batteries, and his phone died too, or he'd left it behind. And he managed to get out. He knew the tunnels very well, but you still have to literally feel your way out in complete darkness like a blind person. He got out, and it took him a few hours to walk the distance. It would normally take him no longer than 20 minutes with lights on. There is one death officially confirmed to have happened in the catacombs. Philbert Aspert, a hospital doorkeeper, went in and never came back. His body was found 11 years later. He was identified by his hospital keyring and the buttons on his jacket. Can you imagine dying of hunger lost underground in complete darkness? It's probably not that bad on carrying so much equipment, including lights. It's a must. Bring the lights, a lighter just in case, and a few candles are also recommended. I always bring a number of lights just in case I stumble and break one. I can always use another. Make sure your phone is fully charged so you can use its light too, and bring a few batteries just in case too. Sebastian found out about the catacombs from the news on TV. He decided to check it out and was so impressed that he stayed inside all night. How long have you been exploring the catacombs? I went in for the first time sometime in 2011, I think, so that means over a decade. Have there been some unusual, interesting things happening here that you might have heard about? Oh, there's always something going on here. People are having lots of parties underground. I come here with my friends a lot to explore, to find new spaces. But as you understand, since I've been doing it for over 10 years, I've already seen everything there is to see. There have been lots of cases down here. Some tourists got lost though, thank God, not mine. Some accidents happen. Unfortunately, things like this happen. What accidents? There was a case, for example, that was all over the news. One group of tourists went in to see the catacombs through a different entrance, not the one we used. They went in through a manhole, and you probably know that a manhole cover is very heavy. It weighs over 100 pounds. As they were going down, the manhole cover, which was old and had a crack in it, broke up, and one piece fell on a guy's foot. Firemen had him brought up with special equipment. The poor guy was deep in shock, because he was hit by a piece of metal that weighed over 20 pounds falling down the shaft that was over 100 feet deep. I honestly think that he was very lucky. That piece fell on the guy's foot rather than his head. Although, and it's very sad, I'm sure he can never walk again like before. So, you have to be very careful. So, if you manage not to get lost, electrocuted, or hit by a falling object, there's yet another thing you might do: drown. It may be a dry day on the surface, but here, it's always wet. Because there is a whole underground river right above the catacombs under the streets of Paris. And in places like this, where water is dripping from the ceiling, you can drink it. And I'm gonna do it now. And I got my butt wet trying to do it. It's very good and very clean. because this water has been filtered by at least 60 feet of soil above my head. Can you imagine that the city of Paris is almost entirely built of stones mined right here in the city? The catacombs were originally abandoned underground stone mines. First, people have been mining stones to build all their beautiful buildings above the surface, but sometime in the 10th century, the miners had to go underground. Back then, no one even thought it might be not so safe to mine within the city limits. As a result, one fine day in the 18th century, a whole street fell through the ground with all the houses and people who lived in them. King Louis XVI then figured that something was wrong and ordered to have the abandoned mines reinforced to prevent such accidents. A commission was formed to study the underground tunnels. They had stone walls built and other reinforcements installed, and made the first attempts to draw a map of the tunnels. This is what it looked like in 1857. Some tunnels got signs with the names of the streets and the boulevards above. Wow, look, how cool is that? They've got street names right here. For example, Rue Nansouté, pardon my rusty French, Porte de Arcey, Boulevard Jourdain. It's really cool that these signs are real. That these streets are right above here. It's really cool. It might give you some idea of where you are. So if you get lost, you might hypothetically know where people have to look for you in terms of the city map. But that's all. That's all the help you can get from these signs. To be honest with you, it's a pretty exhausting exercise. Look, I'm knee-deep in water. Knee-deep already. Oh, God. See these icicle-shaped things on the ceiling? These are stalactites. First, water dissolves the minerals contained in the ground, and then they build up over time where the water drips. It takes them thousands of years to grow even a few inches long. But even little ones are hard enough to break someone's skull. So I've got water dripping on me from the ceiling. And that way, there's a lot of water. And that's where I go. Underground water is completely unpredictable. Whenever people had the slightest suspicion it might break through, they reinforced those walls with concrete. But water never stops and keeps making its way through the stone. Some of the tunnels got flooded as a result. And you can never know which tunnel might get flooded and when. When water breaks through, it fills up in the tunnels incredibly fast. They say that during heavy rain, some tunnels get flooded up to the ceiling in half an hour. Do you know what's right behind this wall? A giant drinking reservoir. It's one of the strategic water sources in Paris. It's called the Montsouris Water Reservoir, and every day it supplies millions of people in Paris with tap water. Isn't it amazing? This water reservoir is thoroughly guarded. Literally guarded by the army because of its strategic importance, and it has to be protected from terrorists and everything. But right here, you can touch this wall and know that all the 52 million gallons of clean water are right there, behind it, as blue and cool as can be. Another wall separates the Montsouris Water Reservoir from the part of the catacombs known as the ossuary, filled with millions of human bones. After several hours of walking and crawling, we have finally reached it. I have not seen anything like this anywhere else in the world. This place is truly scary. These are all human bones. I don't want to go any closer. So how did they all end up here? The story is that right up until the 18th century, Paris, like any other city, buried its dead on cemeteries within the city limits. And just like other big cities in Europe, Paris had a lot of churches of significance in the very heart of the city, along with their cemeteries. The oldest and largest one was the Holy Innocents Cemetery, located right here, between the Louvre Museum and the Pompidou Center. This cemetery was often used for mass graves. They could contain thousands of bodies each, especially when the plague raged in the kingdom. So how did this plague pandemic happen? The bubonic plague pandemic reached France by ship from Italy to Marseille in 1347. The country had a very large population for its time, about 20 million people, who lived mostly in the cities. The disease spread very fast, reaching Paris in just a few months. 6 months later, the death rate was up to almost 800 people. There was no cure. Almost all the infected died. Exhausting fever, painful seizures, and delirium were followed by necrosis of the skin, which gave the disease its sinister name, the Black Death. People got black spots all over due to the spread of gangrene and were dying within a few hours, or sometimes within a few days. The church, meanwhile, only got richer, since people were ready to pay anything to have the loved ones prayed for and then buried. The Holy Innocents Cemetery alone had over 50,000 victims of plague buried in its mass graves. Their bones are now here in the catacombs. The air is very humid here, and if you switch the lights off, you won't see your own hands. The silence here is astounding. It's literally overwhelming, but at the same time, weirdly relaxing.
Вы слышите этот звук?
Can you hear the sound, guys? It alone makes my blood freeze in my veins, I'm telling you. It's so cold underground that you feel like you're in a tomb anyway, and when I say tomb,
Громче.
this feeling gets even worse. Oh, heaven forbid.
Фу, упаси Господь.
But there's more to the Paris catacombs than water and bones. Somewhere between these tunnels, there is the country's largest bank vault. Installed about 100 feet below the surface, it contains £6 million of gold, all the Bank of France's gold reserves. There have been no reports of attempts to rob it, but we can't really rule out the possibility that someone might try. A few years ago, a scandal broke out when a gang of criminals managed to break from the tunnels into a rare wine storage. They stole a total worth of €250,000 of wine from that cellar and 300 bottles.
В некоторых местах здесь...
These tunnels take a lot of turns, and sometimes the next turn might surprise you, taking you to a place like this one. It's like a real cave. One guy went to his basement and fell through the floor right into the catacombs. Wowza, right? Things like that happen too. Of course, people keep trying to watch the tunnels and prevent any serious accidents, but it's really hard to watch everything, since the network is very extensive, and so some accidents do occur every now and again. Even buildings fall through the ground at times like these days. There are still some buildings in Paris located right over the tunnels, and they sometimes collapse. For real? Yeah, for real. Well, it doesn't happen often. The last case was about 3 or 4 years ago, but it still happens. About 10% of the buildings in Paris stand over the underground tunnels. 10% of all buildings is a lot, I think. Actually, you're right. Given that there are about 100,000 buildings in Paris, 1% stands for 10,000. That's a lot, indeed. And did any of them really collapse? Well, it happens that people walk and the ground caves in, and they fall in. Or the ground just caves in somewhere. Some buildings have collapsed too, but you don't need to worry, it doesn't happen often, and usually no one is hurt. Somehow, this doesn't make this place less intimidating. The history knows an event that supplied thousands of dead bodies to this ossuary. I'm talking about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when Catholics decided to kill off all the Protestants overnight in 1572. It started with an attempt to end a series of French wars of religion by arranging a marriage between the king's sister Margaret, a Catholic, and the Protestant King Henry III of Navarre. All wealthiest and most prominent Protestants gathered in largely Catholic Paris to attend the wedding. Catholics seized the opportunity to kill the leader of the Huguenots, Gaspard de Coligny, but their assassination attempt failed. The bride's mother, Queen Catherine de' Medici, said, "We need to finish off Coligny and make others our prisoners." But the whole thing spiraled out of control and quickly escalated into a bloodbath, with the mob killing all Protestants they got their hands on, including women and children. The streets of Paris were covered with dead bodies. Pretty much all other European nations expressed their indignation. Even the Russian Tsar sent his message of disapproval, and it was Ivan the Terrible. Suddenly, this place is loved by all sorts of artists and fans of all things mysterious. In one of the tunnels, we came across a couple who came here for a picnic. They chose a spot with a miniature castle, with a real gate and towers, and all kinds of little people. And they have candles. We also saw another popular place here. It took us an hour and a half to get there. I'm shocked. They have turned this place into a cinema. I have no words. Check out, they've got rows of seats, real rows. They probably bring a cinema projector here, set it up somewhere by this wall, and watch the movies on the opposite one. Check out the images on these walls from the best movies of all time.
Darth Vader.
Here's Darth Vader. I am a big fan of the Star Wars franchise, although I discovered it for myself fairly recently, just a couple of years ago. But now I am a huge fan. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Darth Vader, Miyazaki's Totoro, my daughter's favorite. All these drawings actually make the Paris catacombs a little less sinister. What else have they got? A version of Munch's Scream, a scene from Pulp Fiction, and a well where one might fall by accident. It's a real dump, as you can see. This well is at least 16 feet deep, filled with water, and it's so narrow that you won't be able to stay afloat. So basically, the catacombs are a very dangerous place when you have to look out every step of the way, quite literally, or it could be your funeral. This could be a cinema theatre in Westeros, or at the court of Louis XV, if they had cinema theatres, right? It's absolutely mind-blowing. A cinema theatre in real catacombs. People began watching movies in the catacombs in the early 2000s. This is also an interesting story. A group of artists decided making drawings while keeping their identity secret, just like Banksy today, only much earlier. And back when people used DVDs, they brought a video player and a projector down here, put up a screen, and started showing art house movies. The artists have really transformed the catacombs of Paris. This place is now like the city's largest exhibition of modern art. Of course, there are lots of obscure and unremarkable drawings here, but there are also some well-known artists. For example, here is a drawing by Psy, a fairly well-known graffiti artist. His drawings are on sale for €1,500 a piece. Here is a new take on the Great Wave off Kanagawa, Japan's most famous artwork. It's the centerpiece of a separate space here. They put sand on the floor, and now people are calling this location a beach. This part of the tunnels is a real museum. Just look at all this art on the walls. It also serves as a venue for underground parties that people have here regularly. There is this whole community of cataphiles who come here all the time and just hang out together. See this picture by one of the tunnels? It has the names of the groups of cataphiles who hang out here. For example, every year we have a party for Halloween in the Catacombs of Paris, and we call it Cataloween. Hundreds of people come. Cataphiles bring here equipment for music and somehow manage to connect it to power on the surface by using lots of wires. Holes like this are used to drop wires underground, although originally they were made for different purposes. Back in the day, these shafts were used to get stones out of the mines. They were also used to dump human remains into the catacombs. After centuries of use following the bubonic plague pandemic, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and the French Revolution with its mass executions, the Holy Innocent Cemetery had 2 million people buried within its limits. Graves were 30 feet deep, sometimes even deeper. Each could contain up to 1,500 dead bodies. The cemetery became a serious epidemiological threat. The stench got so bad that wine and milk was said to go sour in households in the area. And finally, a decision was made to clean and close down all the cemeteries in Paris. And that's what they did. They dug up all the buried human remains and dumped them into the catacombs. And that's where they are, till now. And when you're here, you can see them. It's a blood-chilling experience. I don't want to come any closer, let alone try to touch them, because these used to be people, and it's been their resting place for centuries now.
Людей, да, они покоятся здесь уже несколько веков.
It's a known fact that some of these bones could have actually belonged to some very famous people. Among them, French author Charles Perrault, who wrote Little Red Riding Hood, French writer and humanist François Rabelais, and one of the leaders of the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre. Of course, no one is going to look for them here. Today, these bones are of interest only to some present-day witches and psychics, who seem to be after skulls in particular, and to some eccentric artists. Look at this item, for example.
My version is that one of the cataphiles who come here to explore and create decided to make a throne of human bones.
You know, there is a section of the catacombs that's open to the general public. It's been converted into a museum, and people buy tickets to visit it. And they did a great job arranging all the bones in various shapes, like sculptures of sorts. In this part of the catacombs, bones simply lie in heaps on the floor. You've seen them. But I guess someone wanted to try and make some kind of a design out of these bones. This throne, as I call it, has been here for years. You can see it's got some skulls. Skulls are the first to disappear because some people want them, but no one has touched these. Believe it or not, this throne, made of human bones, has been here for at least 10 years. And it's just about as good as new. No one has tried to break it or put a fence around it. I find this pretty remarkable. These tunnels are, in essence, an abandoned area. And I've seen what people do in abandoned areas in many corners of the world. Here, everything is neat and tidy. People can make a sculpture and it will stay right where they put it. No one is going to steal it or break it. The same goes for graffiti art. Many images have been on these walls for decades and no one touches them. Well, I know that many graffiti artists come here and they keep painting all the time. Some people arrange parties. We talked about it. Some people build chambers. I recall that 10 years ago when I started to visit the catacombs, there was only one chamber down here and it was completely empty. People kept digging, building, and with time, they built seats and chairs. And they're quite comfortable, by the way. And there is always someone here working on some project. There are cataphiles who love transforming this place. I finally decided to ask a question I kept thinking about for quite a while. Sebastian is fluent in both French and Russian. I know that he speaks Russian at home with his wife. Does he consider himself French or Russian? I think that in terms of my outlook, I'm probably more French than Russian. I value the freedom of speech. I value the rule of law. I enjoy the French lifestyle, which is very relaxed and is about celebrating your country, your culture. I love French culture. I love France. It certainly has a lot of downsides, I'm sure every country does, but overall, France is a great country and I love it very much. If there was still something I was still struggling to understand, see for yourselves. He lives in Paris, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and yet he chooses to spend his free time in these underground tunnels. They may be interesting, but they are wet, dirty, downright scary. In the catacombs, you get to hear real silence. When you're in the city, even if you shut everything off, there's still some sound. Here, on the other hand, you can sit down, turn off your light, and listen to complete silence. And there's nothing like it. You can't get it in any other place. You see, my friends, sometimes you have to travel far and go underground to realize and feel some of the things we take for granted. The key thing is, of course, to always come back safely to the surface. Ouch! Fuck! In the end, I did hit my head.
Под конец. Господи.
I feel like I'm some sort of underground creature crawling out of some underground kingdom. Is the sun setting already? Oh my god.
Я на свободе, друзья.
I am finally free.
Посмотрите на меня.
Just look at me. I'm telling you, it's been the most bizarre experience experience in my entire life. It's unbelievable. I mean, you're in Paris with all these beautiful streets where you simply must have a cup of coffee and a croissant and enjoy the view, and instead, you descend into these hellish caves.
В эту преисподнюю, по-другому сказать невозможно. Это очень...
I can't find more suitable words to describe it. And it's a very interesting thing to do.
Дает хоть как-то немножко прикоснуться, но...
You explore the city from a completely different perspective, and it gives you a bit of a fuller picture, so to say, I think. I must say that I'm completely exhausted. I'm wet to my bones, even my undies are wet, and I'm covered in dirt.
Весь грязный.
Look at my hands!
В смысле, мои руки. Но очень
But I'm very happy, and I highly recommend to explore things and to go really deep.